finally caught back up on all of our streams, and so the goal now is to hopefully, I think, and no promises. Obviously, I want to get back into doing like some shorts and stuff like that, and really get the content that we make cut into pieces and pushed out, because that's just like that's the meta now. Is it's literally just pushing stuff out as much as you can.
Yep.
And I hate that that's the way that it is, and that you can't just attempt to make something as good as possible and then like you're good. You have to,
Yeah.
you have to cut things into shorts and potentially some like long form stuff. So it's going to be one of those things that's like, okay, well, we got to plan for like, okay, do I have like a 5-minute thing about an update on the Acolyte, or it's like stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
No, but I think, like we talked about, if we can get to the point to putting out 2 to 4 a week. I mean, obviously, if we could do 5, like Monday through Friday, that'd be great. But until we can get to that point, we just got to do what we can do, because,
Yep.
when you're working 70 hours a week,
You do what you can, man.
that's 60 to 75, I should say. Yeah, you do what you can.
And what it may turn out to be is like, I don't know if it may be just finding a way to do a little bit extra to cut into things or whatever. Like, obviously with Star Wars or whatever, it's like maybe the small updates are something that I just do later on during the week, and I just tell you a little bit about it, and then do like an actual like run through of Acolyte. But bro, Acolyte has been, dude, that third episode is it's as bad. I mean, listen, it is as bad as everyone said that it was. Like, and I didn't. It wasn't as if I didn't trust everyone. It was just it was a situation of like, I really just need to see this for myself. And the whole like space lesbians or whatever that everyone's like monikered that as, like, that obviously is really dumb, but the episode is just really stupid in general. It of course it still falls into a lot of the same problems that the previous episodes and all of the Star Wars and all of the Disney content has, where it's like bad writing, bad directing, the two little girls, because it's a flashback episode. Like it all takes place like in the whatever 16 years or whatever beforehand, and unfortunately, like the two little girls that they have, I mean, they're kids. Kid actors are. It's rare that you get good ones, but they are not good. All of their lines are yelled in some manner and very like, why are you doing this? You lied to me. And again, I watching season 1 of House of the Dragon this week to just get caught back up, and then finishing that, and then watching that episode of the Acolyte. Bro, the Acolyte was more expensive than season 1.
That's wild.
And if you go,
that's Disney dollars, though, David.
Dude, I do not understand it, because I can't remember the exact name of it, but there's a small like docu-series that HBO did on it's called like the House the Dragons Built or something like that, maybe. It's a lot of the behind the scenes stuff from season 1, and you had talked about it when it came out, and I had always been like, oh yeah, I want to get to it, like I'm so interested, and just never did, and so I'm gonna finish it this week. But I was going through a little bit of it after I finished season 1 again, and the amount of detail, like it is unbelievably impressive, some of the stuff and the detail that they go to for things that most people will not notice. Like the throne room has all of these carvings on the pillars, and it's stories of the like past kings. And I don't know if what it might have been is that the past kings are on the pillars watching down on everyone, and there's one in like on the back left that it it gets a bit more. One of the characters in episode 1 of season 2 actually looks directly at the statue of Ceres that they're resurrecting in the throne room, and it was cool to have like that little bit of behind the scenes knowledge where you're like, oh yeah, they talked about that in that, which was cool.
That is cool.
And
that's what you call passion and care and
yes,
paying attention to the details.
yes.
It's like we mention all the time with hello Anna Ventura, by the way, in the troll room, and Jake D. But it's like we mentioned with Lord of the Rings, all the detail that went into it. Like when you have care for the little things, that's going to exude out to the more important aspects. You know, not that those aren't important to writing and filmmaking and everything. It's just it stacks on top of each other. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, it's just nice to get a show with showrunners and directors and writers and actors and just you know, production design, just the whole nine that actually care.
Yeah,
'cause this show looks really, really good. I mean, now though, I would say it doesn't have the bangers like "Give me the meat and give it to me raw," the a dark box at the moon, but he can't pull it down. You know, these very like fundamental.
A stone sinks, but a boat floats.
Yes, yeah.
There was one from Acolyte that they did this. They were like, "We are one, we are two," or something.
We are many.
Yeah,
you know what it reminded me of, dude?
It
reminded me of the aliens from the toy aliens from Toy Story when they all talk when they go, "We are many." I don't know why. It just did. Oh man, that's that show is just just goes to just goes to show you, no matter how bad it gets, it can always get worse.
And that's the thing, man. Is like at this point, like we are okay. So 2 years ago, when season 1 of House of the Dragon came out, I don't even. Do you remember what Star Wars was? That Obi-Wan was around that time.
Oh. Yeah, well, so Obi-Wan was
that like Andor
2
Obi-Wan?
years ago?
Okay,
with Lord of the Rings.
And,
yeah.
So it was all around
Lord
that same time. And
yeah.
so we were still in this period where people were fervently defending Star Wars despite, like, it was still, for a lot of people, I guess, it was still there. I guess they had enough question as to the quality of Star Wars. And, you know, Obi-Wan is not as bad as Acolyte, you know. Acolyte actually kind of makes Obi-Wan look borderline competent, even though, you know, that's just in comparison of the two. We're not talking like it actually being competent, but man, it's unreal.
Somebody called Leslie. I don't even know what her last name is now because I said Leslie Headlamp and I can't get it out of my head. It's so stupid.
Leslie Headlamp. Also, Anna mentioned that the king's seat in the small council chamber is a character too. When Viserys and Alicent were sitting in it, it was mostly wood, but when Aegon sits in it, you can see they've painted it iron, which is cool. That is a cool detail. And that's, man, so one of the, and we'll get into it a little bit with this episode, just kind of talking about some stuff from season 1 as well, because there were just some interesting things that I'm curious where some of these character moments from the first season end up going in season 2.
Same.
Because I don't now, for those of you that are listening, neither of us have read the book. We've done that on purpose. I haven't gotten like fully away from spoilers, but the nice thing about the show, and I had heard Nerdrotic mention this, is that there's stuff in the show that, like, if you've read the book, you have no idea what's going on still.
Yeah.
So that it's cool, and hopefully they land it with that stuff. But it's cool that they are basically taking, I think it's Fire and Blood, right, is the name of the book. And
yes, you are correct.
They're expanding on certain characters that don't get a lot of time. Like Viserys was one of those characters. And, you know, he has arguably the best character arc. Well, I mean, it's not fair because his stuff is done, you know.
Right.
Or at least that Viserys. We got bruh. Um,
Yeah. It's unfortunate that dude is named after him.
yep, yep. So there's a lot of just different stuff going on that I'm like, okay. So it's like this is where I was kind of at with Daemon, and then going back through, I was like, that was interesting. I didn't notice that the last time, and same thing with like Allison, and then like it confirmed a few things for me. I was like messaging you while I was watching the show, and there's some stuff in there that's like very much on board now. Like they did some wacky stuff with Kristen Cole, and I don't know why we haven't gotten. And I mentioned this to you too. Is like they really should try to get back around to the whole like Night of Flowers thing, like that whole incident in episode 5 of season 1,
Yeah.
where it was like, because really, and I just don't. If this is what it is, I personally I just don't like it as an explanation. But if it really is like Rhaenyra broke his heart, so he went nuts, it's kind of like, okay. I mean, he obviously is not stable, and what I would say is if that was what they wanted to do, they really should have taken a little more time to make that more obvious. Because you want, dude, up until he really, that scene, he is a pretty standard character, like not a lot of issues, like he and Rhaenyra sleep together or whatever, but you're like, all right, whatever. But it's like this switch goes off in his head, and you're just like it just kind of falls flat. Just kind of falls flat for me.
Yeah, it does. I think it's more so because they're one of our criticisms from last season, with, if I remember correctly, was there were some storylines which made sense but were a bit rushed, and I really appreciate in starting out season 1 in the premiere, in season 2 in the premiere, how they reintroduce storylines and elements from last year to and slowly build instead of just going straight into all-out war. And so with Kristen Cole, I think we get it makes sense. I wasn't necessarily surprised to see him and Allison's relationship. But yeah, the Rhaenyra plot from last season was definitely one that seemed a bit bad. And then him jumping from her to Allison. I mean, that can work and make sense. It just seems like he's just a big old simpy boy.
Yeah. It works more for Allison and her development than I think it does for him.
Ooh, yeah, like her corruption is, there's that conflict with her, that heart conflict, to where she's still trying to hold on to these honorable tendencies.
Yep.
But at the same time, those are slowly being chipped at.
Yep.
More so than she realizes.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, like, so they've tried to do this whole thing where it's like, oh, the greens versus the blacks, like whose side are you choosing? And I'm just very much like, I'm just here for the story.
Yeah.
I have characters that I like, and as time has gone on, like Allison, after rewatching season 1, Allison is higher up now. Like, I find her more interesting than I think I originally did. But because of a lot of the stuff you're talking about, where it's like she is not, she went, like, for what you're saying, she was like a lady and did her duty, and because of really Otto Hightower is a massive influence for her in that season, and the things that basically the way that he treated her, it's the way that she has treated her children.
Yes,
and
that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
she's turning into him, and to Anna's
slowly.
Point in the control room.
Yep.
Yeah, slowly.
Yeah.
To Anna's
but
point
it's good.
in the control room,
it's
definitely with Kristen an honor thing, and it's interesting because when he slept with Rhaenyra last season, he folded his cape and turned it upside down, and then this in the premiere episode, he has Allison just put it straight on him, and like he doesn't care anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I'm surprised she's not wearing it in the middle of them doing that stuff. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
they're
yeah,
um and yeah, but yeah, man. Like I've been enjoying it so much. Like the season starting back over, we got introduced to a few new characters. We got answers about like what happened with the White Worm because she kind of and this is what when you were saying the show feels rushed. There like episode 5, and funny enough, it's the two episodes with my the two characters that I find them the least interesting at this point. So episode 5 with Kristen Cole, and then episode 9 with Rhaenys, where they just like, and the one with Rhaenys is so frustrating because all they had to do is just have her fly out of the dragon pit and not burst through the floor.
maybe they can end up like. Here's my thing. Damon bringing it up again
Yep.
in episode 1. Maybe they'll tie that in and listen to
There was another.
criticism.
Did you catch the other? I don't know if it's it if it, I'm hoping it's intentional. But there's a moment where Aegon says, "We need the small folk in order
Yes.
to win this." And so, like, I'm curious if that's going to become like that's what they need to do. Like, if they were paying attention to what everyone was saying about episode 9, they that needs to be a thing that turns people against the blacks.
Yep.
Not everybody. Doesn't have to be everybody.
But
But
just some.
yes, because that will maybe not fully, because Rainey still acts like she's above it all. You know what I mean? And it's really really frustrating. Because but you're right. Damon in this episode come like basically being like you had the opportunity to end this and you didn't. And you can kind of tell that that she realizes that was probably a mistake in the long run with everything because now
Mm-hmm.
like they are very much in this sort of like back and forth. And from what I've heard, this episode and sort of the theme of a son for a son in this episode is very much a back and forth thing that's going to be happening through the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Which is going to be interesting. And I'm here for it. I'm so dude.
Dude,
I got
did you get giddy and excited when it opened up and it was, oh, we're in Winterfell again.
yeah.
Oh, we're at the ice wall again. Oh, last time we were here it wasn't so good. But I'm digging it now.
And I'm hoping we're gonna get more, but I don't know. I don't know how much of the story they're actually. Maybe it's a little bit of tease. Maybe
snow.
they're gonna do a little more because allegedly we're getting 2 more seasons after this.
Yeah. Do you think we're gonna get anyone that says the snow is always right?
What's so
I'm just
funny is
curious.
that line is 100% because we had talked about this during our Lord of the Rings discussion. I'm pretty sure I brought this up, but like the reason they did that is because of Game of Thrones, because all of the houses have their words, So it's
Yep.
this winter's coming,
Well,
like the whole deal, and so they're over here like,
yeah, of course, those ding dongs tried to put Game of Thrones in Tolkien's work and it doesn't work. But then also, they tried to do the Game of Thrones narrative poorly, obviously, to
Right.
where it's like you have all these different people in this, these different locations, and eventually they're all going to converge and meet on each other. But it's like even with Game of Thrones, how they started off was primarily you had your main characters in one location, and as the story grew things started to branch off. I really enjoy using Lord of the Rings as the example. You have the main branch, the main narrative and main branch of Frodo and the Ring, right?
mhm.
And from there, from him, you get introduced to all these other characters: Aragorn, Legolas, Elrond, Gimli, so on and so forth, right? But they like when each go on their own story, it's a branch off of the main story, and you've already spent time with them to where it justifies, these characters no longer being together. Whereas where Rings of Power fell short, and something that House of Dragon does really well is you're getting to spend time with these characters and get to know them. And now in the second season, towards the end of last season, they started to go, their separate ways. But in this season, it's because you've already got to know each character really, that development has taken place to where they can have their own branch plot line. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
sure.
Rings of Power they had their own branch plot line from the very beginning, and just nothing ever fit.
It's not interesting. It's not interesting.
It
like
came as one and as whole.
Yeah, the character dynamics are bland and boring. Like, oh man, at this point, right? And I think I had told you this. Maybe I had told friend of the show Jake as well. But House of the Dragon, and I'll put Arcane in there too. I'm actually hopefully gonna start rewatching that this week. They're the gold standard in the modern age for how you're supposed to do this stuff. Like, it is the standard by which television, and I would even say movies to a degree, but by which television needs to be modeled. And not like, how we always talk about how they learn the wrong lessons from this stuff?
Yeah.
Not like, oh, it's fantasy and there are dragons and there is betrayal and murder and all of these other, like, no, that's not what we're talking about. It's like, the thing we're really, and when you get to the core of it, and when you watch that little docuseries that they have, it's that they care about the thing that they're making. Dude, like, there's a part in that the first episode of that series where they're talking about is it Balerion's skull down in the like underneath the castle, and that in a Game of Thrones, like the original series, it's kind of tucked away in like storage basically, and dragons like aren't revered. And so what they decided to do was make it to more of like an altar because of the difference in the way that dragons were perceived at the time. And it's stuff like that it's just like, it's so simple, but it's like, yeah, of course you want to do things like that. And you don't have to say it in the show, not outright. It's just there, and you kind of just understand that. And then when you see a behind the scenes thing, you're like, yeah, that's why we did that. You're like, that's so cool.
It's not only that, David. It's getting in this episode, the upkeep of dragons when they're on their downtime versus also when they're in war. And it's a little thing as having Aegon sit on the throne and handle, the small folk, and you have somebody just randomly, come up to him and ask him about sheep, right? It's such a natural way to introduce that. That's such detail.
Yeah.
And then you get Vhagar flying. And actually, one of my criticisms of episode 1, however minor, would be I would think that the guards that are at King's Landing, considering how huge Vhagar is, would know, oh,
yeah,
that's big boy, but I digress.
Well, I rewatched it today, and I was like, I feel like they would have some sort of like scope,
Yeah.
They'd be like, okay, we can kind of tell. I get why they did it. It was to show the scorpions. Like, that's why they did it. But yeah, it is kind of like, And that's the thing, is like the show's not without like little criticisms. There's plenty of things in the first season, and there's a couple things in this one where I'm like, I'm not 100% sure about that.
Well, that's an easy fix. It's as easy as, you hear a dragon roar, right? And so you turn it, and you're like, oh, it's Vhagar. Boom. Not like holding it to see what dragon is that.
Even then, like, you
dragon
go
in all of
they
the
go
biggest dragon in House of the Dragon.
Yeah, they go dragon, and everyone still gets prepared like they did, but someone is looking out. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So who knows? Maybe it's on purpose, Joseph.
I think too, like Otto talking about how like they have it's so awesome that they have Vhagar, but he has to stay in King's Landing. So even though he's basically this Godzilla type figure that could destroy everything, he can't, because as soon as he leaves, they could get attacked.
Yep. And it's all of the conversations they've had where it's like, he's not invincible. Like,
yep.
Daemon is pretty sure that two somewhat large dragons could take care of it. And not only that, But the last scene that we see with Daemon in season 1 is him going down into like the caves in Dragonstone to try to get another dragon, a much bigger dragon, from
Yep.
the looks of it. And I'm surprised they haven't brought that back up yet. But I'm like, okay, I'm here, like I'm here for it. Like you're gonna, I know you guys are
They
gonna pay these
probably
things
will.
off. Like I'm
Yep.
trusting for now. I was, dude. I'll
Ri-
tell you, I was a little worried when the episode. I was like, please be good.
I was too. I'm
I was
not
like,
gonna lie.
please, please. Like I'm so used to all of the garbage that we've been getting recently that I'm like, oh, I hope it's like,
Well,
come on.
I was kind of that way too, especially yesterday before it started. I found out that with Warder Hiram, it's seemingly right. We haven't seen it yet, but seemingly, according to some reports, that it's going to be more like a girl boss tale. You know, the quote unquote
Oh,
use
the
those
new,
terms. I yeah,
yeah.
and I don't want to. I hate using those terms, but I think with people making an uproar about that, like obviously it doesn't need to go in that direction. But her, when it first came out that Hera, they named her, was which funny, her name's means submissive and obedient. Um,
Hmm.
but when they first named her as protagonist, I'm like, well, that makes sense, and I don't want to spoil the story for anyone who doesn't know. Um, but with what happens to everyone else involved in the story, it's like, okay, well, that can make sense. I mean, I would still have preferred it to be just Hammerhand, the um,
Like
main
the actual
protagonist,
story.
yeah, the
Yeah.
main protagonist, and it just ends with him. Like, I would have preferred that, but going with his daughter, that may, I can see why that they would do that, and that makes sense. And so,
Well,
getting that news,
we'll
I
see.
was entering into episode 1 of the premiere last night, and I was like, kind of nervous but excited at the same time.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think the
Because we
show.
know what happened with Game of Thrones season
Yeah.
8.
Listen, they only have to get through 4 seasons, and they have.
And it's a
It's
finished
finished.
story.
You're right. It is a finished story. So yeah,
How about
let's
Jaceres'
go ahead.
interaction with Rhaenyra when, he gets the letter, flies back home, and they see each other, and he's just reporting back to the queen. And he's just like, as he's reporting back, he's choking up and crying.
It's very good.
Dude,
Here-
that may be the best scene in the entire episode. Like it's very effective. And Rhaenyra only had, if I remember correctly, she only had one line.
Yes. So in the like after the show thing, they talk about how her only line in the show is what is it? I want Aegon or something like that. Not Aegon.
Yeah. Aemon.
Aemon. Thank you. But yeah, let's. We don't have to go like super into detail, but let's kind of go through it because this will, at least for the visual, this will help us out a little bit. So if you guys are watching the live stream on YouTube, you can check this out as well. Okay, so one of the bigger new things is that they changed the opening title visually. What did you think?
I liked it.
Me too.
A lot.
Yeah.
Very unique.
It's very interesting.
Worlds Above brings a power, and
Yep.
Worlds Above the Acolyte.
Well,
we've just been watching straight garbage. Jeez, man. Like, really, we have. And you see a show that's competently made, and you're like, oh, wow.
And all of it's very detailed. We could probably spend an entire episode just attempting to break down what's going on here. Because obviously all of these things are important to the season. And so I'm really curious where the intention is with this, and I'm sure someone who has the time is going to be going through all of the details of this thing. But I don't really want to know because I'm sure there are spoilers in here for the season. And it's clever enough that it's kind of hard to tell. And like you're just getting like, okay, clearly it's like how they like this in particular, they're talking about how like when dragons get involved, everything burns.
Yes.
So you're really seeing some different stuff like that. And I like that it's just like not detailed enough to be left open to some forms of interpretation about potentially like characters that are on the tapestries, like that whole thing.
Yes.
This shot in particular, I like quite a bit from it. It's really, really cool. But yeah, I thought it was cool. I'm glad that they changed it. I hope that that's what their plan is each season, to do something just a little bit different. Because it's that nice attention to detail. And man, like, we talked about, I think when we talked about the Acolyte last week, and I told you that one of the things that I think they did well in the show is the design of a lot of the aliens.
Yes.
But that I also told you is like, that's not going to get you really far for me.
No,
it's something to be
what
like,
matters is the writing.
right. Well, it's like, that's something that's cool, but if your show still sucks, that's just something to be like, well, hey, like, good job. Like, you guys, you checked one thing off that's like pretty far down the list, and is also something that only really matters if what you're creating is good. And this title screen, dude, is like an example of that. Really like this title screen. Think it's very creative. It plays very well into the show and like what we're watching, in the same way that the one from season 1 and the original one from Game of Thrones did. But if it sucks, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't. You could put an immense amount of work into it, but if your show is terrible, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So I think they did really well with that.
I mean, we saw that with the Rings of Power, because as a whole, I would say generally with the Rings of Power, visually it looked good. I mean,
Yeah,
not
sometimes.
as good as like spending $1 billion should be, and everything. But
yeah,
the story sucked, and so it didn't matter.
Right, and it looks good was the thing that everyone was going. That was like one of the original arguments. Well, it looks good. Who cares, dude? You just go stare at some pretty pictures. Go outside and look at some pretty scenery if that's all that matters to you. Like, I don't understand. All right. So, like you were saying, this opens up on Winterfell, with the Raven bringing bad news. And I don't know if there's anything in particular that you wanted to talk about here. It's just a little. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say it's a little bit of lore, Yep. And it's within context.
Hitting those member berries.
Yeah, for sure, and it works,
but in a good way.
Yeah,
and like there's ways you can incorporate nostalgia like that, if we want to use that word, that to where it makes sense, where it's natural and it fits in.
And Jaehaerys is with forgive me.
Hey, by the way, I'm gonna send you something too.
Okay.
In Discord, it's a map. One of the things I thought with episode 1 that they attempted to do,
Torrhen Stark,
that's
his name.
Okay. That they attempted to do, but didn't really come across, I think, as well as they hoped for, was kind of, I don't know if you felt this way or not, or thought this, but I was kind of getting lost to exactly the locations of everything, and the map.
No, so here's why. Now, it is a detail thing, and there are. Well, okay, so it's two things. One, I was like deep down the rabbit hole of Game of Thrones when it came out.
Oh, okay.
So like maps and some other things like that, I'm not as knowledgeable as I was at the time. Like, I've forgotten a ton of stuff, dude. But yeah, like I'm somewhat aware of how the continent is set up. And it's relatively simple. And one of the things that's nice about the show, that if you're paying attention, they do this, is there's quite a bit of time spent on like shots of maps.
Yeah.
They do it a good bit in the first season, because you get to see where like Dragonstone is, where oh man, my brain's not quite remembering some of the names of places, but yeah, that like where all of the the different players are, and it's also natural, because what they're essentially doing is like, of course they're looking at maps, because that's what they would do to plan this stuff out. Right. And so it's very like intentional in the way that you get to see where like King's Landing is versus Dragonstone, and the Riverlands and up north, and that certain things are required to do that, and it's a detail of like if you're interested in that stuff, you can figure it out. Now it probably will take some effort outside of watching the show. Like they're not going to sit there and be like, with like a stick or whatever, be like, okay, so here is this, and but they're doing what they need to in order to make it good while keeping the pacing of the show moving forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Here, this map will help me out, because I didn't get all down into the weeds with you. And then I remember last season catching up on it. It's just in, noticing those maps and everything else. Is just with this season, this episode. I was like, just a bit. I mean, what not a total loss or anything like that, but just like, I wish I had just a bit more clarification.
Sure, yeah. I will say this about this opening scene, and I would like more of Torrhen Stark as a character. The Starks are a group that, we get to see them basically struggling in the original series. We get some of their honor, like they're very honor bound with the way that everything works up there, very like hardened people, and we get to see some of that, but being able to see some of the history of people who came before Ned and his family, I'm in a way like as interested in as with the Targaryens.
Yes.
And so, maybe not House of the Dragon, but maybe we'll get something down the road that's a little more like about them. I don't know what you would do necessarily, but I'm sure there's some stories you could definitely tell about House Stark, and maybe some of the other ones. Like maybe what Game of Thrones needs to do eventually, instead of doing like just these television series, is do some movies as well.
Yes, they need to do some
about
movies.
specific events that don't need like a full season to be done. I think they've got the talent, man. I think they could easily put a if they can win back the fan base, which I think they've been doing. And of course, like I've heard like Mahler and Nerdrotic discuss before. That's like, man, they could do like House of the Dragon, another show. If that show goes well, they could just redo Game of Thrones again and try to like correct sort of the direction that originally went. Not that Martin is going to survive long enough for something like that. And honestly, man, they might need to just wait till he dies before they do it again. Man, I was like contemplating going back and watching the original series. I was like, man, but those last few seasons, just like I don't. Like,
it's so hard.
Though I'll say this, I bet they're still better than most of the stuff we've been getting since that show was off the air.
100%.
It's still going to be some incredibly stupid stuff, but at the same time, it's like, man, we're not in a great spot with a lot of this stuff right now. Anyway, so yeah, they have a conversation, and he obviously, it's really important to this, but he. We find out later that the Greybeards that he mentions, which are the men that have seen too many winters, essentially, he's sending about 2,000 of them down to help. And I love this interaction. Again, you get a little bit of one of the things to mention too is that they talk about how I believe it's Jaehaerys and his wife who he was king before Viserys. Came to the wall and the Queen's dragon wouldn't fly over the wall, which is something that they broke the lore of in Game of Thrones, but of course it was like, I'm pretty sure it was later seasons, so those dummies were...
Yep. They didn't care at that point.
Yeah.
They were just so focused on, writing those hit Star Wars movies.
Bro, Star Wars ruined everything! But it's the details, man. Like the little bit of lore here, the little bit here. You go, oh, that's interesting, and you have an idea of why. And one of the things
I
that
should I should go back and do a edit of the opening scene, and when they go into Winterfell, you just see a Starbucks coffee shop on the side because
it's just hanging out in there.
yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, man, I think it's really some of this stuff's really cool, and occasionally, like Jake's read Fire and Blood, and I told
Jake Reed?
oh dude, yeah, he gets like he goes down rabbit holes of like fantasy lore. He knows like a ton about Lord of the Rings too, and we were talking a little bit about Game of Thrones, and I told him he had to promise not to tell me anything about Fire and Blood, and he's like begrudgingly he's like fine. But one of the things that we've talked about some that when he's been reading is that, and I knew some of this but not as much, there's like a lot of like eldritch gods in Game of Thrones, and one of the things that George R. R. Martin said that he never wanted to do was actually show any of them. So it's like Cthulhu type creatures that live sort of like I guess like outside, they're outside of the known sort of like world to some degree. And there's some stuff that is going on with characters in like original Game of Thrones that just completely got ignored for the show that makes it so much cooler. And like some of it I know about, some of it, it's like Lady Stoneheart and a few other things that they didn't end up doing because I think that D&D, when they were making it, thought that stuff was maybe I'm putting words in their mouth, but I think they thought it was too stupid and too outside of like what they were doing, even though it's like, dude, you have like dragons and ice monsters and you're like, nah, we can't resurrect Catelyn Stark. Like it's a weird thing. They're fishmen too. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense if there's like basically a Cthulhu in that world, and that stuff's really really cool to me, and it's why like there's this part of me that's like, okay, give it like another 10 years and remake it, and make it like more high fantasy, like dark, but really dig into it a little bit more, like remake the throne in the throne room the way that it's described in the books. Instead of doing just like we have the throne, like I would love for them to really like dig into some of that stuff more. And I think we're in a time now where like audiences are way more accepting of that kind of stuff than they probably were even back when the original show came out.
Yeah.
I'd love it. It would be really cool. All right, so what else do we need? Let's see where we're going next.
I like that he says he's going to give him 2,000 old men. I'm ready to see these old men.
Same.
I wonder if they're going to be like beasts, like amazing fighters.
Well, it's like that's the thing is that his character, we're with him for 5 minutes maybe not even that long, and he's very confident. He seems like a really really strong leader, and when he's like, "Oh, they'll fight," he's basically like, "They'll be your best troops." Like they will fight for you, and I'm just like, oh man, it's so cool. Yeah. Love it, can't wait. So now we get the scene with Rhaenys and Daemon, and let's just talk about I want to talk about Daemon sort of like overall in this episode, because I think this is probably his strongest scene in the episode.
Yeah, they don't understand. Ryan still doesn't understand why Daemon's such a light character by the audience. It's like he's a multifaceted character, has sweet armor, and has an awesome dragon. What's not to like? Liking a character is different from liking them because they're moral.
And we talked, dude. I feel like we talked about that so much in in season 1, where it's like we don't like them because they're like righteous characters. That's not the point. Like the show is very much like Game of Thrones in general. It really likes to dig into sort of the dark nature of humans, and people really do find that interesting. And Daemon, for all of his faults, and and what people would consider to be like bad things, and this is why I told you, like, now I'll preface this by being like, this is sort of like season 1 Daemon up into a certain point, that there's a part of me that thinks Viserys should have put him on the throne, made him his successor. And not because he's like kind and because he is in many ways, he's like he's almost the polar opposite of Viserys, but he would have kept the realm together. He's like not
he was willing to do whatever it took.
Yeah,
but I think him having the throne would have corrupted him even more. You know what I mean? I think I was making that argument with you, not fully though, through text yesterday, but kind of I could see the aspect where Daemon would be more rampant with violence, more wanton. You know what I mean? And so although at the same time, to in defense of Daemon, he is kind of like a Tywin Lannister character, to where he's very pragmatic and willing to do what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of funny. It's sort of like him and Otto. I think it's so great that their characters clash because they're similar in that way. Because Otto, in the beginning of that scene when they're at the table in episode 1, he basically tells Alicent and everyone, like, yeah, if we would have just listened to me and wiped out everyone when I said we should have, none of this would have happened.
Yep. And I was just like rewatching season 1, and obviously before things get out of hand. So really before episode, like, here, and what's crazy, dude, is like, so and I love Viserys. Viserys makes so many mistakes in season 1, like stuff that I didn't quite, and it's just like going back and being like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, if he had done this probably would have been better. So it's like, he should, like, despite Laena's age, this is the world they live in, right? Like, it is the pragmatic, or like this is what they have to do because these are the roles that they've been given. Should have married Laena and gotten House Targaryen involved in that. Laena, if you go back and watch those episodes, not only is she very dedicated to her house, she is like, she would have been a significantly better queen than Alicent. Would have been behind Viserys.
Yes.
Potentially would have given him an heir. Rhaenyra would have never had to get involved in all this stuff, because if you watch like her and Alicent early on in the show, like, Rhaenyra does, like, she wants to like leave. She wants to go on adventures. Like, she wants to be her own woman. And I think like there's a part of Alicent that like wants the same thing. And when you start to see that split, and I can't remember what episode it is, but there's a line in it. Oh, I think it's in episode 8. It's one of the best lines that Rhaenys has in the show, where she's talking to Alicent because Alicent's capped, like, she's locked her in the room, and she basically tells her, like, you don't want freedom, you want to cut a hole in your cell to see outside. And I'm butchering that a little bit. The delivery is like really good, but there is just like all of this stuff that, Viserys was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to be peaceful. He was trying to keep his family together, and he was trying to not marry like a 12-year-old.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, all these things that like you're like, yeah, correct, yes. But then like when you start to see the pieces fall into place and the fallout that starts to happen because of these different things, you go, ooh, you know what, man? In hindsight, you made the wrong choices. And, hindsight's, 20/20, but it's like, ooh, there was definitely some stuff that if you had been thinking a little bit more about, it's like, despite everything that he was doing for his family and trying to do the right things for them, ultimately, like, a lot of the decisions that he made, it's going to get most of his family killed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's just very interesting to see, like, where all of it was to, like, where we are now.
Or he could have just, like, at the same time, married neither of them and came up with a different option as
Well,
well.
you're right, but so here's the thing: is like he just didn't. That would have never happened because like they told him that he had to remarry, right?
Right.
Otto, everybody's basically like, you have to remarry, and your two best options. They were saying the best option, and in order for things to move ahead properly, was for you to marry Lena. And it's the thing is, man, is it's like that's kind of like part of what they're doing is like everyone knows it's weird and gross, and that like stuff like that happened in a time where things like this were real. Not like the dragons, obviously, but like kings and queens, and they're marrying off their kids at these like super young ages. It's very like distasteful, right? And you see it, it's so funny because like you see it on Viserys' face where he's like, oh, and like the part where him and Lena are walking through the gardens early on in season 1, you can see how uncomfortable he is with the entire situation.
You can't blame him at all.
No, you definitely can't. But like looking back on it, you're like, ooh, buddy. And you're like, you could have probably saved a lot of people's lives. Just saying. So it's very interesting to go back and watch that and be like, oh, the pieces just kept falling apart. He didn't. There's some other stuff that you could probably argue about, like, man, he probably should have gotten rid of Otto Hightower earlier than he did.
Mm-hmm. And I think to your point, to where Daemon would have done what he thought was best to solidify his family.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can say what you want to, but he is definitely for his family, even though he mistreats them too.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a line that I believe Viserys mentions in season 1, where he says that he and Rhaenyra, speaking about Daemon, he says he and Rhaenyra are they're Targaryen. They're very much Targaryens in the sense that they have this like wildfire in them that's really hard to tame, and you see it in different ways where like Rhaenyra. She's like sleeping around a lot, and like, when that side of things gets like unlocked for her, like she has like no control over it basically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some other things too, and then the connection that Rhaenyra and Daemon have with each other, and then Daemon's it comes out in a violent manner, and it's something that like I saw some people kind of complaining about the way that he was treating the twin and the White Worm in this episode. And there was like a lot of like, oh man, why is he doing that or whatever? And it's like, man, honestly, I think it's as easy as he's just lashing out because there are things that he wants to do. There's stuff that he believes needs to be done. And he literally can't do it because of where Rhaenyra, and he talks about it in the scene, and it's like, and because at first I was like, well, maybe it's like out of character. It feels a little out of character for him. Like he's usually not this brash. Like you watch him in season 1, and he's not in the scuffles a lot of the time. He's hanging back. He's watching. He's calculating. He's trying to figure out what needs to be done, and that's the stuff, especially in season 1. It's one of the reasons he's probably my favorite character in season 1. Like he and Viserys both. It's a really tough choice, but those are the things I love about him. And so to have him come in episode 1, and he's a little bit more like, you can see how frustrated he is with everything. And I'm like, come on, Daemon. I'm like, come on, man. Like,
and he's getting more antsy as and anxious as the episodes progress, or excuse me, as the episode progresses.
Oh yeah, his brother just died too.
Boils
to be fair.
over.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna. But yeah, man. Like, so it's episode 1, and I'm not. It's not like, oh no, they've ruined Daemon. Like, it's sort of more of the setup that it's like, oh man, he's a little more unhinged and not potentially thinking things through properly.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see where that's gonna go. And obviously, by the end of the episode, you see like the result of some of that. Though, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit. There is a line from, I believe, the Ratcatcher, at the end of the episode, because he basically he like sends them to try to go assassinate Aemon, and he's like, "What if we can't find him?" And he doesn't say anything. It holds on him for a few seconds because again, the show is very good in the way that it does everything, and is it gives everyone like proper time on screen to let certain things sink in, especially on like a rewatch when you know what's coming. You're like, oh crap!
Yes.
You're like, oh crap! He knew. Like it's so obvious too.
Yeah.
But yeah, like man,
It's just a subtlety in this episode too. It's nice to have subtext to where you just see looks and smiles and
dude,
smirks
I
that
know
communicate,
a lot.
information without having to have lines. I
Yep.
mean, just like Damon's smirk, like with Rhaenys in this scene, and then Otto's look he gives Alicent, saying that basically communicates, "I know that you and Kristen are sleeping together."
Yep. And
Man,
of course, it's
just
we at the very least we did get recognition that Rhaenys, the episode 9, there was a lot of problems with it. That's because you had mentioned this to me last night after the episode was over, and it did really feel like potentially the showrunners know at this point. They're like, yeah, episode 9 might have had some problems.
yeah.
So and I think I can't remember if we had mentioned it on the stream, but I'll mention it one more time. This, along with a line that Aegon says later on about how the small folk are, I think we did talk about it, but the small folk being important to like victory or whatever, could come back to hurt Rhaenys. And if that's the case, and she can kind of like, I don't know if like come to terms is the right, but if that's like character growth for her in some form, that would be great. Where she either just denies that and you go, oh, so her true colors are coming out and she doesn't really care about the small folk. Like it always has been just like a selfish ambition for her. That would be great. Or if she goes, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe the first one more than the latter, but it would be interesting for sure. All right.
Yeah.
We can talk about Rhaenyra a little bit. There's not a ton to say about her in this episode.
I would say I enjoyed, from what I said earlier, with her and her son. There's so many names.
We can
Jacaerys. I enjoyed
Jacaerys.
that, but I really enjoyed the scene with her finding Luke's coat and
Arax.
and the dragon.
Yeah, I think it's Arax.
Wing,
here
and
it is,
then
here it is.
What's her dragon's name? Cyrax or whatnot. I want to say
the dragons. I've always had a tough time keeping up with the names.
In any case, I think Luke's dragon was Cyrax's, if that's the name. Dragon child, or spawn as well. And so
I'll get to that shot.
with her and with Rhaenyra and Cyrax, when they're both mourning, it was like, I know dragon and dragon riders have connections, but I was also wondering with the dragon, like, oh hey, I just lost my child too.
Potentially.
That definitely.
Yeah, that's a potentially a cool little detail there. That the bond, it's not just a bond of the dragon with the dragon rider, but like that's the
bond,
the
of
loss
the
of the child. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, she's the name of her actress is slipping my mind. But she's great, man.
She really is.
I going back and watching season 1 again too, like not only do I love that they put Emma D'Arcy, thank you. That they put the detail in with like when they change over to their older selves, essentially. The attention to like finding someone where you're like, she looks exactly like what she would look like when she grew up. Like it's so believable. It's not like a weird change, With
all of them.
Yeah. They do like a really good job of doing that. I think the one that I think that's a little harder for me to get behind is Aemon.
I actually enjoyed his characterization in this episode because it seemed like we started to get a bit more.
He's
and
hung.
granted, he's
Yeah.
not a likable
Well,
character in the sense of like his morals, but he's like
whoops.
you get that him hanging out with his friends and just
Oh,
you know
that's
they're all
Aegon.
just
Aegon.
oh
Aegon.
yeah, my
Aemon is
bad.
his brother. Sorry.
Yep, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I was just saying that like Aegon or Aemon, like from when he gets his eye basically cut out in season 1, and then like when they transition him over, like those two people, I'm kind of like, I don't know if you would turn into you. It's
Yep.
like it's a small detail. I
Yeah.
don't care that much, but like I was kind of like, I don't know. I don't know. I was like, it's fine. It's no big deal.
It's
Uh,
them Wheaties, man.
yeah, right. But yeah, I,
Them
I
Westeros Wheaties.
yeah, we can talk about Aegon a little bit because I think they have done a lot for him in this season. Is this where it is? Even like when he's coming into the throne room and his friend over here calls him the magnanimous, and he's like,
Yeah.
he looks at him, he's like, what? And I didn't catch it the first time around, but at the very end of the episode, when you see him and his friends and they're all drinking around the Iron Throne, that they're having a conversation again about that, and
Yes.
he goes, I can't remember exactly what he says, but they're having a conversation, and he's like, oh, I'll use this word next time, and I'm like, thank you. I was like, this show just like you didn't have to do that.
That scene with Aegon and his wife when where they're all with the servants
Hmm.
and she says the rats. I'm really afraid of the rats, and it just gets like quiet for a few seconds, and he responds with patience and says, "My queen, the queen is an enduring mystery, isn't she?" I was just like, that's so great. Oh man!
She's
And then
oh, sorry, what
go
were you
ahead.
saying? I was gonna say I love her character too.
I do too.
She's the only thing we have left in the show that's any form of like innocence, really.
Yes.
I mean, obviously you have like some of the kids still, but she strikes me more so than anyone in the show is like she's just completely innocent in everything that's going on, and it adds so much to her character and like what happens to her and like moving forward. I'm curious about that because she isn't fully there, right? Like she's slightly disconnected, and one of the things that's cool about Game of Thrones is that like typically we would just be like, oh well, she's got like autism or something's going on there, but like in Game of Thrones it's because of magic.
Yes.
Like there's something else outside of like the natural world that's causing that. She's one of my favorite characters too because she is the clue as to like stuff happening in the show and potentially things happening in the show. And when she's like I hate the rats or whatever, I was like, oh no. And the only thing I could think about watching the show the rest of the time is like, what's gonna happen with the rats? Like what?
I
It's
know.
so good.
And just the symbolism of the rats being there too, showing there's a sickness there
Mm-hmm.
and corruption and disease. But I really do
Yeah.
enjoy her character. I think you hit the nail on the head saying like she's the last innocent character we have, at
And
least that I can think of off the top of my head.
right, well, she
Although I
had
will say,
her kids obviously like that's not,
yeah,
but they're
and just
not.
Jerry's as well. I mean, Jace, he's
Oh
you
yeah,
know
he's
you
the
get the,
yep, he's the good
he's
boy.
actually he's trying to do everything with honor and do everything the right way.
Yep,
Um,
yep. Yeah, probably won't end well for him.
no, it won't. He'll probably get his head cut off.
Man, I mean, Rob Stark was very much the same, man.
My
And
boy Rob.
I know, and it
That
hurt.
one cut deep to the
It
heart,
hurt,
dude.
bro. I saw that episode, The Red Wedding, the day it came out, and I was just like, I was devastated. I had no clue that was gonna happen, and man, ugh.
Every time I think about that scene now, I can't help but also think about the Rebel Moon scene with the king and
Oh,
the
dude.
freaking violin player
Yeah, that show is.
and how they pick up Tip
Um,
so fast.
I had something else I was gonna say, and I just don't remember what it was. Doesn't matter. But yeah, man, it's cool to see characters who kind of were just Aegon in particular. He was not in the forefront of the show last year, or excuse me, 2 years ago. And so for him to essentially jump up into a major role in the show is very interesting, and they handled it well. The actor is really good. He brings a bit of that levity. He's also not what I was expecting him to be. He seems to actually be much nicer and more generous and wants to do things right than I would have expected.
Yes, I do as well. It seems like he's trying to actually be interested in being the king and putting a foot forward, although I do find it likely that he may become disinterested in it and maybe
Like they were saying.
a lesser form of what was his name, Robert or Boris Baratheon, the king
Oh, Rob.
in
Yeah,
season.
Robert.
Yeah, Robert, like a lesser form of him.
Well, and it's
But
interesting.
still in that same vein.
You could be right, and part of it could be like what you were saying about Jace, where the two of them are sort of like juxtaposed to each other. And you have the one on the throne, and then the one where you're like, maybe he really should lead, you know? But of course, it's Game of Thrones, so.
But then you also have that comparison between Rhaenyra and Alicent, and how, really in season 1, especially with them as kids, you see that Alicent is the studious one. She's the moral one, the one with honor, wanting to do everything right. And now, kind of as adults, it's kind of the opposite, to where you see like Alicent doesn't really like. She loves her kids, but she thinks they're all dumb.
Yeah, she's completely disconnected.
Yep, it's kind of like Otto was with her, and then Rhaenyra loves her children, and they love her.
Yeah,
and
that was actually something I was looking at going back through season 1, because I remembered that's sort of where we had ultimately landed, and I was like, okay, I just want to see again. That's what a lot of it was. I was like, I just want to see if like I still feel the same way about certain things, and I think for the most part, it just dug a little bit deeper, and there were just like some characters that came out better for me than I had originally thought, sort of like Alicent, where it was like, I think the first, when we watched it when it was airing, I was like, yeah, but like she didn't do a whole lot for me, and like now I'm like, okay, she's a lot more interesting. I just, it's like there were so many good characters and stuff going on, I think she kind of got pushed aside a little bit. But on like another watch through, you're like, oh no, I actually really like her. She's interesting, and it's just different compared to a lot of the other characters that we have. But the way that they are developing her, I like quite a bit. Okay, let's talk about Larys real quick.
Yes,
not a lot of time in this episode, but it was the right amount of time. Yep. So 2 big things with him. He clearly is either vying for the hand position or just some sort of, maybe he wants to stay behind the scenes a little bit more.
I think Larys is, at least in this opening episode, trying to just pit everyone against each other, and obviously he's trying to carve his own path, but I don't know if necessarily. I'm wondering what his motivation is going to be. I'll just say it more diplomatically without giving any firm thoughts. I wonder if what his motivation is going to be. If it's going to be similar to Littlefinger, to where he's trying to carve his own path and come to power in some form, or if it's just going to be more of a Joker character, to where he's just trying to cause chaos.
Yeah, he. So one of the things that it could be too is like, I don't think they have like a master of whisperers yet. And the troll room can let me know for sure, but I don't think they have that as like a position, the same way that they had people who took on that position in the original show.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if that's his plan. Is that you're right? It's like maybe he's not going for the hand, but he's trying to do like position himself into a place where he gets on the council. They create the position for him, and he is the one who's like essentially getting all of the gossip and keeping the king informed about a lot of the stuff that's going on in the city and with people and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's the sneakier version of the hand, if you will. So it definitely could be.
Yeah, but I'm wondering who and what it's all for.
Like,
it's just got to be for himself, because I don't know if he has necessarily anyone in mind, like on his team outside of Alicent, like is sort of under his thumb in a way.
Yeah, he absolutely used her in order to get to where he's going. because they are not compared to where they were in the first season. Like things are different for sure with the two of them. He has risen like her station in a lot of ways. I think has we're seeing that to some degree with like the conversation she has with Otto, where she's like, "Don't undermine me around my children," you know. And a part of that is I think now Larry's is his station is starting to rise. So he essentially used Alicent to boost himself up, and now that someone is essentially above her, he's now working on him to get himself, essentially into a better position. At least that's my guess as to where his character's heading now. And he is one of the characters that the book readers have no idea. They don't know where any of that's going with him,
which is good.
It could be for sure, because it's cool. It's like that is not like a full on story. It's Fire and Blood is a history, so certain characters, there's not a lot there, so they have some stuff to work with, and if they're careful with it, like I think for the most part they have been, with a few little trip ups here and there. I think it could turn out to be really, really interesting what they do with him.
Agreed.
So yeah, that was that conversation that Alicent and Otto had. We find out that the White Worm has returned. I don't know what her role ultimately is going to be this season. If this is just hey, she's alive and she's setting this thing forward, and then we don't see much of her again. Yeah. But I'm curious if she's going to be more of a player in the show or not. Because I kind of thought like, Laris is sort of the Greens, sort of like whisperer, like, and then maybe she's going to take up the role for the Blacks. But I don't know if that's actually going to happen. It's more of just a theory because it could go either way with her because she seems like she wants out more than anything. But
kind of like the Lady of the Night in Shogun.
Yeah, a little bit. Because that's what she did, and she went from essentially being like the top of the prostitutes that like she got out of that life and started essentially selling information.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. And one of the things that they mentioned in this episode that I thought was interesting is that one of the girls that was working for her that was like Alicent's handmaiden got killed in between season 1 and 2. That they like they basically like murked all of her staff.
Yes,
which I was like, oh dang. And they there's that scene where they're talking and he's like, oh yeah, you were indisposed earlier, and he tells her that her entire staff got replaced and that the other ones were disposed of essentially. Pretty crazy. I love how like there are sometimes lines in the show where it's just kind of nonchalant, like they're like, yeah, it was indisposed, and like if you're not fully paying attention, you're like, hang on, what? Like, what happened to those people?
Oh, and that Larry's knows everything as far as with Alicent, and you could tell how uncomfortable she was with him.
Oh my God.
Picking her staff and her just in the bathtub trying to, just clearly showing that she's uncomfortable with the situation.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I think we got to talk about that ending scene now.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Let me drag through here real quick and just. Oh, we're almost there. Actually, I didn't even realize we were that close. Man, this episode flew by. I watched it again today before we started. And of course, we get Emma Darcy's only line in the show. She wants Aemon. That really interesting scene with Alicent, right, where she goes ahead and she's praying for Luke, adding a little layer to her. I'm like, all right, They have the funeral. Not a lot to say there, really. And then we have the last few minutes of the show with, and I didn't know this. This is something I had heard from because I haven't read the book. Oh no! It was the after the credits thing. They call these two characters in the book are called Blood and Cheese, I think.
Yes.
And
I've heard that.
they don't have like actual names, and the showrunners were worried about giving the last like essentially 7 to 10 minutes of the show to them. These characters that, like, as far as I'm aware, like, maybe they'll show up in the next episode depending on like if they get caught or how how and if the information about like Daemon doing this gets back to the Greens. But yeah, they're pretty much like only here for this specific part. And Daemon, this was the part that I was talking about. The Ratcatcher asks Daemon, what if we can't find Aemon? Essentially, like, what if we can't find the prince? And he just looks at him, and that's it. Like, it's such a, you were talking earlier about the subtle looks in the show, and this is one of them where he just asks him about it. I just want to get to that shot again because it's so good. And Matt Smith is an actor that I feel should be much more popular than he is. He's such a good actor, man.
He really is. He steals the camera every time.
And let's see here. I'm playing this back a little bit. But it's just the look that he gives. He just gives him this look. He and it's the only thing you need to know, especially after you find, like, you've seen what happens. Like, if you go back and watch it again, you're like, ah, crap, he knew. He had some idea. Like, it wasn't one of those things that he was like, oh, no. If you can't find Aemon, just give up.
Yeah.
That was not the intention. And I didn't catch that on the first, like, go through. It was like, oh, my gosh.
I like how it just kind of cuts and he doesn't really respond. You just see his expression on his face and very much implying that a son for a son, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh. Yep. So yeah, you have this.
Yes,
this is what I was.
Ryan, Daemon is not a good guy. We know that.
Who?
Daemon is not a good guy. We know that. He's willing to do horrible things.
Oh, yeah.
Aspects to his character that are likable.
But it's what makes his character. It's what makes his character good. Like, everything that he's doing, you're like, yeah, totally makes sense. He really only cares about essentially like the people he considers to be family. Yeah. And he has clearly made a statement with this who he considers to be family. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And of course, this is kind of what I was talking about before, where like there are, you have the map of Westeros. It's a little harder to see in this scene. I think there might be another shot of it somewhere in there, but they are taking the time to like give you some sort of idea of how big the world is and like where stuff is. And hopefully, unlike its predecessor, it does not start teleporting people around Westeros. It's not only is it a problem at the end of that, but like we were talking about this, that it's like the Acolyte did this, where it's like, hang on, like how are they moving so quickly? It's like, oh, you're here, then you're there, then you're there. And the show, thankfully, I think is taking its time, and I hope it learns its lesson from that for sure. Yeah. And then, of course, the last few minutes with our rat catcher and I'll just keep calling him Blood and Cheese. It's easier. They're going through. It's pretty simple, and this is that scene that I was talking about, Joseph, where like they come into the throne room and Aegon is talking with his friends about what previously happened in the episode. Yep. And they didn't have to do this. Like, it's something that they could have been here, they could have been drinking, they could have done anything, but they're like, no, this conversation probably would have been brought up again. And they're having a good time, they're drinking, and, someone probably would have been like, that word you used earlier, like, what? Like, people don't know what that means. And then like they have a conversation in that few minutes when you get it in passing where he's like, well, I'll use this word next time. And I'm like, that's so cool. Here is I was talking about the earlier the details in the pillars, so you can see it. This is like a couple really good shots of these pillars, and then you have Viserys, who they're working on setting up on his end. And someone I think it might have been Anna in the troll room, was saying earlier that Robert tears all that stuff down when he becomes king.
Wait, read that. I'm sorry. I was
Oh, you're good.
reading what Whoopa said to you.
I know. I know. He's a troll. Robert Baratheon tears down. Yeah, we were just talking about how like there's after the Targaryens are off the Iron Throne. Robert, he removes Balerion and basically puts him in storage. And then they tear down all of the statues out of the Great Hall and remove all of those pillars like that, like tear all that stuff down. It's very interesting. Of course, the Ratcatcher, being a terrible person, kicks his dog. I was like, oh, bruh.
People are more upset at that than it seems like than the kid died.
About the kid. And then, of course, it all culminates in the death of
which was gruesome.
I know, dude. They handled it right, though.
I really think they should have just done it off camera, and it just cuts to the queen running.
Yeah, I guess. I think, though, it's the best way to set up what's coming. Like, you have to. I think you have to. It was just enough. You have to get the audience in a position of being like, holy moly.
Yeah.
And just like the brutality of that, for you to understand like everything that's coming next, and this what seems to be now this back and forth of each side taking hits at each other, trying to do this kind of stuff to each other. Yeah, and it's brutal, man. Like it's that watching it through again, it was like, nope, still brutal. And that's pretty much the episode. And
solid episode.
Let me see if I can try to jump over that thing. But of course, like Alicent and Kristen are still together, and there's a lot that you can kind of like read into with like, because there's stuff with Alicent where it's like, okay, oh, you know what the weird one of the things that I thought was weird about the episode, and this is something that someone would probably have to kind of convince me of a little bit more. It's a little weird that no one was guarding the queen. And so my question is like, was that...
Well, maybe Kristen was assigned.
Yeah, was Kristen assigned. And it's also crazy because, the queen runs through quite a bit of the castle. And I'm like, where is everybody? I'm like, is this normal? And it's like, maybe it's because of the time of night. But it's kind of odd. And you're right. Maybe Kristen. We'll find out in the next episode, right? So I'll hold off judgment a little bit until we know for sure. But I did find it a little weird where she's like going for a while, and I'm like, there's nobody in the castle. Like, none of the king's guards do a night shift. That's not how that works. So I thought that was a little odd. I've seen an argument made that both Kristen was probably assigned, and there have been a lot of guards leaving for the black side. Oh, okay. That's a fair enough.
Other thing I was going to mention.
That's a fair enough argument.
Turnover.
Yeah, and maybe that's one of those things that they'll mention in the next one as well, where it's like we just don't have the people or whatever. Rough times. Turnover's tough.
Yes.
Especially for this family. All right. Well, Joseph, that's episode 1. We are 1 down and 9 more to go, and I'm here for it, man. They they do the little after the credits, they do the little like this season on Game of Thrones thing, and that honestly, dude, it's been a while. That got me so hyped for this season.
Yes.
Like I'm trying to maintain composure to some degree, but I have to admit, like I'm pretty hyped to see where the season goes. Like season 1 was solid. And so at least to some degree, they've got my trust going into season 2. Now, obviously, things can change. But I'm on board for now, and it's nice to be excited about watching something for once, and we get to do this for like 10 weeks.
Right. It's gonna be nice, dude.
Oh man. And Anna was saying that this season on looked better than most of the trailers. I agree. I don't know what the trailers. I didn't watch all of them, but they were like okay, you know. But that, and maybe that's what they were doing. Like they were, just trying to hold back a little bit. Who knows? But yeah, man, I'm excited. I'm curious to see how it did, at least numbers wise. Like if people are still watching, if people were looking forward to it.
Oh, I bet
they've been pushing it pretty hard. I mean, like the marketing has been everywhere as far as I can see. So I'm pretty stoked to see where this is going. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we close out?
No, that is it.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone in the troll room who came to watch the show with us tonight. Thank you to everyone who is downloading the podcast and has been listening to us weekly. Thank you to all of our donators. We're going to maybe try to bring back the value for value section just a little bit. It has been quite useful for us. And Joseph, if you'd like to talk about that for just a second before we go, I will close us out after that.
Actually, I do want to do that, and then hopefully, as we mentioned at the start of the show, we can get back to making clips and getting that out there on the socials. But in the meantime, what our value for value system is just a way for you to, if you think you're getting value from our content, you can turn that value in the form of your time, talent, and treasure. So if you are being entertained and you think this is, worth $5, $5,000, $5 million, $5 billion, whatever value you put on our content and what enjoyment you're getting. And it's just a way for us to, provide quality content for you guys and gals, but then also to naturally grow our content and not be beholden to advertisers. Because anytime you have advertisers, they like to encroach on your speech. And so we try and steer away from that, just have you guys support us. And then also, we don't like to do the Patreon thing to where it's like, hey, pay $5, you get this much, pay $50, you get this much, $100. It puts more work on us. And then also it's like, no, like it's whatever value you determine you're getting from us. So.
Alrighty. Thank you so much.
So if
Joseph.
you like to edit videos specifically,
one of these days, man, I think we'll be able to get there with that. But man, we're at the point now where as soon as I actually get all of our stuff squared away with that, like the software stuff that we use for the podcast is pretty much paid for the year. I'm probably getting rid of Adobe soon.
Yes.
With all the stuff that's come out with that, I have DaVinci Resolve on my computer. And like I told you, the biggest thing with moving over is like I need to get competent with it. Because I wouldn't getting rid of Adobe is not only for the show, but like that's what I use for business stuff.
Yep,
so
it's a big overhaul.
Yeah. And people have been talking about DaVinci for years. There's like a free version of it. So I think what I'll probably start doing is at some point, now that I'm caught up, I'll start using it a little bit. Like I'll pull one of our podcast episodes in there and kind of mess around and see like what it does. But yeah, that's I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen because it's what Adobe's been doing recently is like that's the kind of stuff that you and I both are just like, nah, man. And if I don't have to pay for Adobe every month and I can run everything for us without it, like that'd be great. So, thank you all again for hanging out for episode 176 of The Underground. We'll be back next week with episode 2 of House of the Dragon. And, maybe some other news depending on what comes up. And until then, y'all take it easy.
See ya.